They say that a mother's love is unconditional, that she gives without expecting, sacrifices without counting, and protects even when it hurts. I used to believe that. I lived by it. I built my entire life around it. And for what? So my only son could look me in the eyes with a smile while secretly waiting for me to die. Hi, my name is Marlene, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the deepest betrayals come from the ones you raised with love. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. I raised Caleb on my own. His father left when he was barely 4, and from that moment on, it was just us. I worked nights at the hospital as a nurse and spent my days making sure he had everything he needed. I missed sleep, skipped meals, and wore the same sneakers for 6 years so he could have new ones for school. And I never complained. Not once. When Caleb graduated from college, I felt like I had finally done something right. He became a real estate agent of the best in our small town. He started dressing sharp, speaking with confidence, and buying me little gifts. A new coffee machine, a weighted blanket, one of those fancy foot massagers. Every time I thanked him, he'd say, "You deserve to feel taken care of, Mom." So when he offered to help me update my will, I didn't hesitate. He said it was just a precaution. "You never know," he joked. "What if you get hit by a bus tomorrow?" We sat at my kitchen table. He brought over documents, and I signed where he pointed. He even had a notary with him. He was so professional, so calm. I was proud of him. And then things slowly started to change. It began with comments, little things, like, "Mom, maybe it's time to think about downsizing," or "That staircase could be dangerous for someone your age." I brushed it off. But then, I caught him showing my house to a couple. They were walking through the backyard while I was hanging laundry. Caleb's face went pale when he saw me. "Mom, I didn't know you'd be home. This is just preliminary. They're clients. I'm just giving them a sense of layout." I was stunned. "Of my house? Without telling me?" He mumbled something about market interest and how the neighborhood was getting hot. I stood there, frozen, while the couple waved politely and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to my file cabinet, pulled out the will I thought we had made together, and reread it. Only, it wasn't what I remembered. It stated that Caleb would receive the house upon incapacitation or death. It also granted him power of attorney, medical, and financial. Effective immediately. He could make decisions for me. He could sell the house. He could move me into a facility if he wanted. And I had signed it. I had signed everything. I felt sick. The next morning, I confronted him. "You changed the documents. You used my trust." He didn't even deny it. He just stared at me, then said, "You're getting older, Mom. You need someone to look out for you. I'm protecting your interests." "By showing my house to strangers?" He shrugged. "It's going to happen eventually. Better we prepare now." I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled. Just like I had all those years when I worked double shifts to pay for his field trips. I smiled, and I began planning. I started paying attention, watching Caleb more closely, not just the way he acted around me, but how he talked to others' neighbors, his assistant on the phone, even the bank teller. There was always this slight edge in his voice, this tone of control wrapped in politeness. I realized I didn't know my son anymore. Or maybe I never truly did. One day, while he was at work, I called the notary he brought to our meeting. She remembered Caleb well. Too well. "He's very thorough," she said. "Make sure everything's in line with what he wants." I asked her point blank if the will I signed was what I had agreed to. There was a long pause. Then she hung up. That's when I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a setup. Caleb had orchestrated every detail, knowing I trusted him enough not to read the fine print. He had power over my life now. Legal power. That thought haunted me every night. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom and moved to the living room, just to feel less vulnerable. I stopped answering the door. I began keeping a journal, writing down every suspicious thing. Every time he entered the house without knocking. Every bank notification I didn't recognize. I went to the courthouse to request copies of every document with my name on it. I had to wait for hours, feeling foolish, like a paranoid old woman. But when I finally got the folder and saw my signature next to clause after clause I didn't remember discussing, my hands began to shake. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I had been betrayed. Not by some scammer, not by a stranger, but by my son. My only son. The boy I gave everything to. The man who once said, "You'll always have me, Mom." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the table with all the documents spread before me. I realized I had two choices: roll over and accept what he had done, or fight. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with strategy. I started looking for a lawyer. Quietly. I searched online under incognito tabs. I spoke with 3 different firms before I found one that specialized in elder law and estate fraud. The attorney, a sharp woman named Deborah, didn't blink when I told her what happened. She'd seen it all before. "It's more common than you'd think," she said. "Sons, daughters. They play nice until the paperwork's in place. Then the gloves come off." I brought her everything. Every file, every printout, every memory I could put on paper. She told me I had a case, but I had to act carefully. Because technically, Caleb hadn't broken any laws. Not yet. He'd simply exploited my trust, using his charm and my ignorance to gain legal control. And until he took further steps like trying to sell the house, I couldn't take him to court. "But we can prepare," Deborah said, "and we can scare him." So that's what we did. I filed a revocation of power of attorney, effective immediately. I changed my will this time with full legal counseling and a witness of my choosing. I also installed security cameras, changed the locks, and opened a new bank account at a different branch. All under Deborah's guidance. I didn't tell Caleb a word. Let him think he was still in control. Let him plan his little betrayal while I built my fortress. It took everything in me not to scream when he walked in one day holding a "for sale" flyer and casually mentioned, "There's a buyer interested in a house just like yours. If the price is right, we could move fast." I just smiled and poured him some tea, because he had no idea his game was already over. Caleb started stopping by more often. At first, he'd come with groceries or with a bag of pastries from that cafe I used to love. "Just checking in, Mom," he'd say, flashing that smile he'd perfected over the years. But I could tell he wasn't looking at me. He was surveying. His eyes moved around the room, over the mail pile on the counter, the open drawer where I kept my checkbook, the medicine bottles by the sink. It wasn't love. It was calculation. I played along. I let him think everything was fine. I even thanked him for being so attentive. Told him I felt lucky to have a son who cared so much. And the thing is, a small part of me still wanted it to be true. Still wanted to believe this was all just a misunderstanding. A mistake he'd regret when he realized how it made me feel. But people don't accidentally make copies of your keys and enter your home when you're not there. People don't call assisted living centers and ask about future availability. I knew because I called them back. One receptionist said, "Oh yes, Caleb mentioned you might need a quiet place soon." A quiet place? I nearly dropped the phone. Deborah told me not to confront him. "Let him dig his own hole," she advised. "The deeper, the better." So I did. Every visit, every call, every strange transaction, I documented it all. Caleb had no idea I'd revoked his power of attorney. He still thought he held the pen. That illusion was my protection. Then one afternoon, he brought someone new with him, a woman, about 35, sharply dressed, and not shy about surveying my living room like it was already hers. "Mom," Caleb said, "this is Justine. She's an interior designer. She might have some ideas for freshening up the place. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Is that so? Justine smiled. It's such a lovely structure. Great bones. A few updates, and it could easily sell for twice its value. Sell. The word hit like a slap. Funny, I said, keeping my voice sweet. I didn't realize I'd put the house on the market. Caleb chuckled nervously. No, noof, course not. Just exploring options. I looked at Justine. Thank you for your time, dear. But this house won't be needing any updates. Not while I'm in it. She glanced at Caleb, who tried to mask his irritation. When they left, he barely said goodbye. That evening, I called Deborah and asked, how much time do I have before he tries something drastic? She was blunt. He's impatient. If he's making moves like this, he's expecting something to happen soon, either your consent or your absence. My absence. That's when I started suspecting something more sinister. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being hunted. One morning, I found my vitamins replaced with unfamiliar capsules. The label looked identical, but the pills were off-white instead of pale pink. I didn't touch them. I took the bottle to Deborah, who sent it to a lab. The results weren't conclusive, but the warning was enough. Stop trusting anything in the house I hadn't sealed myself. I threw out every open bottle, every container. I started drinking only from sealed water bottles and eating prepackaged food. I checked locks 3 times a night. I even kept a crowbar near the couch where I slept. It felt ridiculous until it didn't. Because 2 nights later, I heard the back door creak open. I froze. The clock read 2:41 a.m. I grabbed my phone and hit record, keeping the screen dimmed. The footsteps were soft but unmistakable. I stayed behind the couch, heart racing. Then I saw the silhouette. Broad shoulders, confident gait. Caleb. He walked past the kitchen, paused at the counter, then turned and quietly walked back out. He never saw me. He never knew I was awake. I sent the video to Deborah the next morning. It's trespassing, she said, but proving intent will be tricky unless he takes something or worse. She suggested a private investigator. At first, I hesitated. It felt like something out of a television drama. But then, I thought about those capsules. About that woman, Justine. About Caleb walking through my home in the middle of the night like it already belonged to him. So I hired one. His name was Ron, a retired detective with a quiet voice and eyes that missed nothing. He installed a hidden camera in the hallway and set up motion alerts on my phone. Within 3 days, we had footage Caleb returning late at night, walking through the living room, standing over my desk, opening drawers, always careful, always methodical. Ron also did some digging into Caleb's finances. What he found made my stomach turn. Credit card debt, tens of thousands, a failed investment in a crypto venture with a shady partner, and the biggest bombshell: Caleb had already contacted a buyer. A private investor ready to purchase the house in cash. The papers had been drawn up. The only missing piece? My condition. That's how they referred to it in the email. Once your mother's condition changes, we're prepared to close within 10 days. Condition. Not consent. Not readiness. Condition. Like I was a lemon rotting on a shelf, just waiting to fall. I stared at that word for a long time. Then I printed out the email, folded it neatly, and tucked it into my journal. It was time to stop waiting for Caleb's next move. It was time to make mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my armchair with a blanket around my shoulders and the printed email on my lap, reading it again and again until the words blurred together. Once your mother's condition changes. It wasn't even subtle. Caleb was planning for my decliner, worse, trying to speed it up. The thought alone should have broken me, but it didn't. It lit a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in years. That morning, I called Deborah and Ron and told them it was time. We weren't going to wait anymore. We were going to act. Deborah filed a formal petition to contest the previous documents under grounds of undue influence. She explained that while I had signed them, there was mounting evidence Caleb had manipulated the process and taken advantage of my trust. We needed to build a solid case, and timing was everything. Meanwhile, Ron suggested a public move something to let Caleb know the tides were shifting without revealing all our cards. So I did something simple. I threw a barbecue. It wasn't extravagant, just some neighbors, a few church friends, and my cousin Helen, who hadn't been over in years. I cleaned up the backyard, strung up some lights, and cooked like I hadn't in a decade. And then I invited Caleb. When he arrived, he was surprised to see so many people. "What's all this?" he asked, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Just a gathering," I said sweetly. "You know, to remind myself I'm not alone." That wiped the smugness right off his face. Throughout the evening, I watched him. He was polite, charming, but twitchy. He didn't like the attention I was getting. He definitely didn't like seeing me surrounded by people who cared about me. At one point, I saw him talking to Helen near the grill. She later told me he'd asked if I'd mentioned anything about moving soon. I hadn't, but I told her to let me know if he brought it up again. 2 days later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside were glossy photos pictures of me, taken from a distance, walking to the grocery store, sitting in the park. Even one of me through my kitchen window. I held them in my trembling hands. Bile rising in my throat. It wasn't paranoia. Caleb had someone following me. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was someone he hired. Either way, the message was clear. He wanted me afraid. But I wasn't. I was furious. I called Ron immediately. He told me to stay calm, to leave the photos untouched, and bring them in for fingerprinting. He also had a suggestion: if Caleb wanted a performance, we'd give him one. That Sunday, I called Caleb and told him I hadn't been feeling well. I said I was tired all the time, dizzy, forgetful. I added a touch of worry to my voice. He took the bait. "You know," he said gently, "maybe it's time to talk about long-term care." I let out a small, rehearsed sigh. Maybe. Within 3 days, he'd arranged for me to meet with someone from a local retirement home. She showed up all smiles, pamphlets in hand, calling me Miss Marlene, like I was already her resident. I listened, nodding, sipping tea. And then I handed her a business card, Deborah's. "You can direct all future conversations to my attorney," I said. Her face dropped. I smiled. Later that evening, Caleb called me. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, dropping the act entirely. "I thought we agreed this was for your benefit." "Funny," I said. "I don't recall agreeing to anything that involved photos through my kitchen window." There was a pause. Then he hung up. That was the last straw. Deborah filed a restraining order the next morning. She also submitted a motion to freeze any real estate transactions connected to my property. Legally, Caleb could no longer touch the house. His buyer backed out within a week. Ron confirmed ITAN email trail that ended in disappointment and frustration. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then Caleb showed up at my door. This time, he didn't knock. He just pounded with his fist until I opened it. "You think this is over?" he growled. "You've ruined everything. My credit, my reputation. I did all of this for you." I looked him in the eye, heart pounding. "No, Caleb. You did this for yourself. You saw me as a stepping stone. But I'm not done living yet, and I won't go quietly just because it's convenient for you." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. I watched him go, his back stiff, his shoulders tight. For the first time, he looked small to me. Not the son I raised. Just a man flawed, selfish, and now exposed. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it with a deep breath. The storm wasn't over, but the sky had cracked, and I could see a path forward. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Caleb didn't call. He didn't text. No surprise visits, no emails, no mysterious envelopes. At first, it felt like peace. Like maybe, just maybe, he had come to his senses and realized he'd gone too far. But I knew better. Silence from Caleb wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Deborah agreed. He's regrouping, she said. And we need to be ready for whatever comes next. So we stayed alert. Ron kept tabs on Caleb's financial activity and online records. Meanwhile, I focused on reclaiming my space. I moved back into my bedroom, took down the blackout curtains I had hung in fear, and opened the windows. I cooked full meals again, not just microwave dinners. I even started going to a watercolor class at the community center on Wednesdays, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. It felt good. It felt like I was starting to breathe again. Until one Friday morning, I received a call from the hospital where I used to work. The woman on the line, a younger nurse named Elise, sounded hesitant. "Hi, Mrs. Hampton. I hope this isn't intrusive, but someone's been calling our records department asking for your medical history, saying he's your next of kin." My stomach clenched. "Did he give a name?" "Yes, Caleb Hampton." I thanked her and hung up. That was his next move, trying to build a case for incompetence, no doubt hoping to portray me as mentally unfit to manage my affairs. Maybe he was even thinking about guardianship. Deborah confirmed it later that day. "It's a classic play," she said. "They claim concern, get a few doctors on their side, then file for conservatorship. If he wins that, you lose all control." I felt like I was back at square one, but Deborah was ahead of him. She arranged a full cognitive and psychological assessment for me, with a court-certified professional. I passed with flying colors. The doctor even wrote a glowing report about my mental acuity, organization, and awareness, sharper than half the people in my department, he joked. We filed the report with the court immediately and flagged any future attempts at accessing my medical data as harassment. That should have been the end of it. But Caleb wasn't finished. The next week, Helen called me, whispering into the phone like she was hiding in her closet. "Marlene, I didn't want to get involved, but Caleb's been calling everyone. Our cousins, old family friend, 7 people from church. He's saying you've been acting erratic, that you're accusing him of stealing, that you've always had issues." My throat went dry. "What kind of issues?" He hinted at mental breakdowns. Said you're paranoid, that you're being manipulated by some greedy lawyer. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my name, my reputation, everything I'd built. Deborah suggested we go on the offense. "Let's stop reacting and start controlling the narrative," she said. "Tell your story. You've been protecting him long enough." So I did. I sat down and wrote a letter 4 pages long. I described everything from the moment Caleb brought the will to our kitchen table to the sleepless nights, the security footage, the falsified documents, the pills. I attached evidence, photos, bank statements, the notary's name. I didn't attack Caleb directly. I just laid out the facts. Then I mailed it to every person he had contacted, every family member, every friend, even our old pastor. I didn't ask them to choose sides. I simply told them the truth. The silence after that was heavy but different. No more whispers behind my back. No more pitying glances at the grocery store. And then, one by one, the calls started coming. First Helen, then June, my friend from church, then even my estranged brother Tom. "I had no idea," they each said. "I'm so sorry." It wasn't about winning them over. It was about reclaiming my voice. And in doing so, I began to see something I hadn't noticed before. Caleb wasn't strong without my silence. He had built his control on the assumption that I'd keep quiet, ashamed, too loyal to speak up, but I wasn't quiet anymore. And he was unraveling. Ron sent me a report later that week. Caleb had applied for a personal loan and been denied. He'd defaulted on 2 credit cards. The investor who pulled out of the house deal had blacklisted him from further partnerships. His name was starting to carry weight, but not the kind he wanted. Then came the biggest shift of all, a letter. Handwritten. From Caleb. Delivered in person but left in my mailbox. It read like an apology, but it was hollow. "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted what's best. I got carried away. Maybe we can talk. I read it twice and set it down. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness requires acknowledgement. And he hadn't given me that. Not really. A few days later, I returned to my watercolor class. I painted something small, a teacup on a table with a crack down the middle. I didn't fix the crack. I painted around it, highlighted it. Because it was part of the story, just like everything Caleb had done, just like everything I had survived. Autumn rolled in quietly that year. The leaves turned gold and rust, and the air smelled like damp soil and fading warmth. For the first time in months, I found myself sitting on the porch in the early mornings, wrapped in an old sweater, sipping tea without fear that Caleb would suddenly appear behind me. But peace, I had learned, is not just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of control. And I still had more of that to reclaim. Deborah encouraged me to consider going one step further. You've protected your house. You've cut his access. But what about the larger picture? Your estate, your legacy, your story? I knew what she meant. Until now, I'd been playing defense. But I wasn't content with just holding the line anymore. I wanted to draw new ones. So we started drafting a new trust stone that would clearly state who had rights to what and under what conditions. It wouldn't just block Caleb from inheriting anything automatically. It would redirect my assets to causes and people I believed, in people who had never once tried to erase me. I left a portion to a local women's shelter, another to the hospital where I had worked for 3 decades. I listed Helen as my medical proxy. I gave Ron a stipend for his tireless work. And I made it very clear, Caleb Hampton would receive nothing unless he completed 10 consecutive years of unpaid community service, verified by multiple agencies. He won't like this, Deborah said. I'm counting on that, I replied. Meanwhile, Ron kept digging. He found out Caleb had been trying to sue one of his former clients over a lost commission. The court dismissed the case due to forged emails. Apparently, deception had become Caleb's default setting. One afternoon, I was coming back from the grocery store when I saw him. He was parked across the street from my house in his car, wearing sunglasses, watching. He didn't get out. He didn't wave. He just sat there, engine running, like a ghost stuck in neutral. I stared back, didn't flinch, didn't hide. After a long moment, he pulled away. That evening, I added another entry to my journal. Date, time, plate number. Ron said it was enough for a report of harassment if I wanted it. I declined for now. A week later, I received another letter. This one typed, legal sounding. Caleb was contesting the change in my will. Deborah chuckled when she read it. He has no case. He's just trying to intimidate you. Still, I felt the sting. Every attempt he made to control me through paperwork, through fear, through silence, was another slap in the face. But instead of recoiling, I doubled down. I started a support group at the community center. Family Betrayal and Elder Exploitation. That was our name. We met every Thursday. At first, it was just me and 2 women from church. By the end of the month, we were 9. 9 women and 1 man, all over 60, each with a version of the same story. Children who had taken advantage of them, manipulated legal documents, or tried to isolate them for control. We shared details, strategies, attorneys. It felt like building armor, one painful story at a time. I told them about Caleb, every detail, no sugarcoating. And for the first time, I didn't cry while telling it. I felt strong. That strength carried into the next court hearing. Deborah had filed a motion to have all documents signed under Caleb's guidance, declared void due to coercion. He was ordered to appear. I sat on the bench in my navy dress, my hands folded in my lap, while Caleb walked into the courtroom looking tired, thinner, and older than I remembered. He didn't meet my eyes. His lawyer, some slick man, half his age, argued that Caleb had acted out of concern, that I was confused. that my new entourage had turned me against my only son. Deborah stood calmly and read out the list. The altered will, the unconsented power of attorney, the surveillance photos, the attempted medical manipulation, the house showings, the buyer emails. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth was louder than any shouting. When the judge asked Caleb if he had any response, he just muttered, "She's my mother." I thought I was helping, but even he didn't sound convinced. The judge didn't issue a ruling that day. Legal things take time, but I didn't need a verdict to know I had won something already. My dignity, my clarity, my power. That night, I went home and cooked myself a real meal roast. Chicken, garlic potatoes, and even a little apple pie. I set the table for one, lit a candle, and raised a glass to the version of me that had once believed love alone would be enough to keep someone kind. I no longer believed that, but I did believe in boundaries, in truth, in fighting for yourself when no one else will. And as I looked around my warm, quiet house, still mine in every sense of the word, I whispered to the silence, "You messed with the wrong mother, Caleb." And I meant every word. In the weeks following the hearing, the energy in my home shifted. Not because Caleb was gone, he wasn't entirely, but because I no longer lived in his shadow. The house felt lighter. My steps felt firmer. And I began to reclaim the small routines I had once sacrificed in the haze of fear. I redecorated the guest room, painted the kitchen cabinets, a cheerful pale yellow, and even installed a new mailbox zone without the dents and scratches Caleb's messages had left behind. Deborah continued handling the legal side, while Ron kept watch in the background, his quiet presence a constant reassurance. Still, there were moments, small ones, fleeting but sharp, when grief crept in. Grief, not just for the son I'd lost, but for the illusion I'd clung to for so long. There were nights when I'd pick up an old photo album and see Caleb as a boy gap-toothed, laughing, holding a Lego creation with pride and wonder where that child had gone. But I didn't let myself dwell there for long, because the woman I had become couldn't afford to live in the past. One morning, Deborah called with an update. "The judge approved our motion. The old documents are void. Your revised will stands. Caleb no longer has any claim over your affairs." I sat there in stunned silence. "You're free," she added. And I was. Legally, financially, emotionally, I was still working on that. But I was getting there. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I danced. Alone in my living room, to a dusty old jazz record I used to play when Caleb was little. I moved slowly, my hips stiff, my feet uncertain, but with every step, something cracked open inside me. A joy I thought I'd buried, a spark of defiance, a quiet rebellion. Later that week, I received a letter, not from Caleb, but from his lawyer. It was short and formal. Caleb was leaving town, moving to another state. A fresh start, the letter claimed. I didn't believe it was that simple. I suspected debts were closing in, opportunities drying up. Maybe the walls he had built out of charm and manipulation had finally collapsed. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. His silence said more than any apology could. But the town talked. In grocery store aisles and church parking lots, people whispered. Some pitied me. Others admired me. A few asked quietly, "How did you do it?" And I told them the truth. I stopped pretending. I stopped hoping he'd change and started changing how I responded. I stopped letting guilt guide me and let boundaries protect me instead. One woman, Eileen, whose son had tried to force her into a retirement home, she didn't want joined our Thursday support group the following week. She cried through the whole session. And at the end, she hugged me and said, "You gave me the courage to say no." That mattered more than any legal victory. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was paving a path for others who had been silenced by shame or love or both. One day, as I walked past the town square, I saw a flyer taped to a community board. Elder Rights Workshop, hosted by Marlene Hampton. My heart skipped. Deborah had submitted the idea on my behalf and arranged it without telling me. "You've got a voice now," she said. "Use it." I was terrified, but I said yes. The first workshop had 12 people. The second, 35. We talked about power of attorney, medical directives, emotional manipulation, and financial fraud. We shared our stories. We cried. We laughed. And we learned that we were never alone, just isolated by fear. But not anymore. One evening, after the third workshop, I came home to find a package on my doorstep. No return label. Inside, I found a photo album. The same one I thought Caleb had taken years ago when he moved out. It was filled with picture-she's childhood, our birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. Tucked in the back was a letter in his handwriting. No apologies, no explanations. Just one line. "I didn't know how to love you the right way." I read it once. Then I slid the album back into the box and placed it in the attic. Not out of anger, but because some chapters are better stored than reread. I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't the mother who waited. I was the woman who survived, who rebuilt, who danced. And as I stood at my kitchen sink, watching the leaves fall and the light change, I knew this was just the beginning not of a war, but of peace. Winter came early that year, draping the town in soft silence and frost-kissed mornings. I started waking up before dawn, not from fear or habit, but from peace. I'd brew a pot of coffee, light a candle in the windowsill, and just sit with myself. No footsteps upstairs, no rustling in drawers. Just the sound of my breath and the quiet creak of a house that finally felt like mine again. But healing, I learned, doesn't always come in a straight line. Some mornings, I'd still feel that old achy whisper of betrayal lingering in the corners of the room. It would come uninvited, during simple moments, opening a cupboard, folding laundry, setting a second place at the table, before remembering I didn't need to. That kind of pain doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in. But every time it did, I acknowledged it. I didn't push it away. I let it pass through, like wind through a screen door. I had learned how to let things pass. That winter, our support group grew so large, we had to move from the library's back room to the local senior center. We weren't just victims anymore, we were advocates. Warriors, in cardigans and sensible shoes, who'd been underestimated one too many times. The stories that poured out of those Thursday meetings broke my heart and strengthened it at the same time. A woman named Dorothy revealed her grandson had stolen her Social Security checks. A man named Walter shared how his daughter had isolated him from his siblings, convincing him he had early dementia just to gain access to his finances. Each voice, each tear, felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. We weren't crazy, we weren't weak. We were targets because we were trusting, and now we were done being quiet about it. Deborah encouraged us to speak publicly, to write editorials, to testify. She helped organize a town hall on elder rights, and when the mayor asked for someone to open the event with a personal story, all eyes turned to me. I almost declined. But then I remembered that day in my kitchen, when Caleb first placed those documents in front of me, smiling like the good son he wanted me to believe he still was. I remembered how small I had felt, how invisible. I never wanted another woman to feel that again. So I agreed. The night of the town hall, I stood in front of a crowd of nearly 100. My voice trembled at first, but I kept going. I told them everything. How I was manipulated, how I was watched, how I almost lost everything, not because I was incapable, but because I trusted the wrong person. I saw heads nod. I saw people cry. And when I finished, the entire room stood, a standing ovation, not for the pain I'd endured, but for the truth I had dared to speak. That evening, I received a message on my answering machine. Caleb's voice shaky and quiet. "I heard about the town hall. I'm not calling to argue. I didn't know it would end like this. I didn't call back. I didn't delete it either." I left it there, like a photograph of a life that once was, untouched, archived. Power isn't about revenge, it's about choice. And I was finally choosing what to carry and what to release. Around Christmas, I hosted a dinner not out of tradition, but because I wanted to fill my home with laughter again. Helen brought her husband. Walter came with his sister. Even Deborah stopped by, surprising everyone with her killer pecan pie. We ate. We toasted. We told stories. My house, once the battleground of betrayal, had become a sanctuary. That night, as I washed dishes at the sink, Helen came beside me. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked gently. I didn't answer right away. I thought of Caleb's childhood laugh, his tiny fingers gripping mine, his teenage smirk when he got his driver's license. And then I thought of the pills, the late-night visits, the smile he wore while erasing my future. "I miss who I thought he was," I finally said, "but I don't miss who he became." And that was the truth. I could hold on to the love I once had for him, but I didn't have to keep the wound. Healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing who gets to write your next chapter. And I had picked up the pen myself. By the time spring arrived, everything felt new, not just the trees or the air or the wildflowers that pushed up through cracks in the sidewalk, but me. I had spent so long shrinking, apologizing, doubting myself, that I almost didn't recognize the woman I had become. But I liked her. She was steady, she was sharp, and she had survived. News of the town hall spread farther than I expected. A local journalist reached out for an interview, wanting to do a feature on elder abuse and manipulation. At first, I hesitated. It's one thing to speak in front of a supportive crowd, another to share your story in print, to risk judgment from strangers. But I said yes. Not for me, but for the woman out there still trying to convince herself that her child wouldn't do such a thing. The article came out in May, with a photo of me sitting on my porch, smiling gently, the headline reading, "She trusted her only son until she found out he'd written her off." It was blunt. It was painful. It was true. I received dozens of letters in the following weeks, some from people I knew vaguely, others from neighboring towns. They shared stories. They asked questions. Some even asked for help. I started meeting with a few of them one-on-one, sharing what Deborah had taught me, helping them understand their rights. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a counselor. But I had lived it, and that, it turned out, was enough. One afternoon, I got a call from the director of a statewide advocacy group. He'd read the article and wanted me to speak at their annual conference. "You don't have to be an expert," he said. "You just have to be real." I agreed. And when the day came, I stood on a stage in a hotel ballroom, in front of hundreds of people, professionals and survivors alike. I told them about the house, the documents, the pills, the betrayal. But I also told them about the healing, about the painting classes, the dinner parties, the support group that had turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. I told them about dancing alone in my living room to jazz music and finding joy again. After the speech, a woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "My daughter did the same thing," she whispered. "I thought I was crazy, but now I know I'm not." That was everything. That one sentence made every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every courtroom sigh worth it. Caleb never returned to town. As far as I knew, he was living in a small apartment 2 states over, bouncing between real estate gigs, his name now more cautionary tale than local pride. He sent a birthday card that year. No return address. Just a simple, "thinking of you." I didn't respond. I didn't even open it. I placed it in the same box as the old photo album, stored away in the attic because I had finally learned that some things don't belong in your present just because they lived in your past. That summer, I took my first vacation in years. A coastal town, nothing fancy. Just sea, air, quiet mornings, and a journal full of pages I no longer had to fill with fear. I walked barefoot on the sand. I let the sun warm my shoulders. I smiled at strangers. I was no one's mother there, no one's victim, just Marlene. A woman with laugh lines and stories and a quiet strength she had earned the hard way. On my last evening there, I sat by the water and wrote a letter not to Caleb. Not to the courts, not even to myself. But to the women like me, I wrote, "You are not crazy. You are not alone. Love is powerful, but so is your voice. Use it. Stand up. Lock your doors if you must, but never lock away your truth. You are not here to be erased." I left the letter on a park bench, folded under a shell, hoping someone would find it. Maybe they already have. Maybe they will tomorrow. Either way, I'm not waiting anymore. My life is mine again. Every inch of it. Life after betrayal is quieter. Not because the echoes disappear, but because you learn to live above them. I still hear Caleb's voice, sometimes not the adult version, but the child who used to call out, "Mom," from the stairs when he had a nightmare, the one who'd leave scribbled cards on my pillow with crayon hearts and wobbly letters. Those memories haven't vanished. They've simply been folded, gently, into the corners of my mind where I keep both love and caution. That balance, holding space for both pain and compassion, has been my greatest lesson. I never set out to become anyone's example. I just wanted to protect my home, my name, my peace. But sometimes, when you fight for yourself, you give others permission to do the same. The support group I started has now grown into a nonprofit. We call it Second Voice. We help older adults review legal documents, navigate family disputes, and find advocates who won't talk down to them or write them off. I never thought I'd become a founder at 70, but purpose doesn't ask your age. It just waits for you to say yes. Deborah is still by my side now as a board member and close friend. And Ron, bless his quiet ways, still checks in every month. "You keeping that crowbar by the couch?" he jokes. I always smile. Only for decoration now. The house is filled with new memories. The kitchen smells of lemon and thyme. The hallway hosts pictures from our group events, framed like family photos. I've painted every room at least once. The garden in the backyard is thriving. Sunflowers, tomatoes, mint, and lavender. I even built a small bench beneath the old oak tree. That's where I go when I want to think or not think at all. One sunny afternoon, I received a call from a young woman named Claire. She worked for a state legislator who had read my story and wanted to propose new safeguards for elderly homeowners. She asked if I'd testify before the state committee. I said yes, not out of obligation, but because the law never protected me, but maybe it could protect someone else. The day I walked into that government building, I wore a blue blazer and carried a folder filled with letters from people like me, people who had written to Second Voice, sharing how they'd been deceived by their children, caretakers, spouses. I didn't just speak as Marlene Hampton, the woman whose son had tried to erase her. I spoke as the voice of hundreds. I read from their letters. I named their fears. I showed their strength. And when I finished, there was silence. Not the kind that comes from discomfort, but the kind that comes before something shifts. Later, one of the representatives approached me. "Thank you," he said. "You made this real." After that, the calls kept coming. Universities asking me to speak, nursing groups asking for training materials, churches asking for guidance. I kept saying yes, not because I wanted attention, but because there were too many voices still buried beneath shame, and I had the shovel. But even in all that advocacy, I never forgot to live. I traveled. I read romance novels. I joined a cooking class. I had lunch with Helen every Friday without fail. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we didn't. And one night, as we sipped red wine on the porch and watched fireflies blink across the yard, she said, "You know, if I didn't know your story, I'd think you'd had a charmed life." I laughed. Maybe I have, just not in the way people expect. Because charm isn't always ease. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's turning the ugliest thing that's ever happened to you into something beautiful. Not because you forget, but because you choose to grow anyway. Caleb hasn't reached out again. No more letters. No more calls. I suspect he knows now that I am no longer reachable in the ways that once gave him power. And that, I've learned, is peace, not the absence of him, but the absence of his hold. It's strange, the way life circles back. One morning, nearly a year to the day since I discovered Caleb's betrayal, I stood in my living room, sunlight pouring through the windows, and realized I no longer walked with caution. I no longer braced myself for the sound of keys in the door, or double-checked the locks 3 times before bed. The weight had lifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like snow melting off a roof, piece by piece, fear by fear. I had found my rhythm again. My home was filled with warmth and honest laughter. The plants on the windowsill bloomed bright green. I had become someone I never planned to be: voice, a presence, a woman who stood tall not because she was untouched by hurt, but because she refused to let it break her. Every scar I carried told a story, and every story I shared made someone else feel seen. That, in the end, was my true legacy: not the house, not the documents, not the title of mother, but the strength to rise, and to help others rise with me. I don't know if Caleb will ever change. That part of the story is no longer mine to write. I gave him life, but he chose what to do with it. I've chosen mine now, with open eyes, with a heart that knows better, and with a voice that will never again be silenced. If you're listening to this and see yourself in my story even a little, I want you to know something important. You are not powerless. You are not alone. And you are never too old to take your life back. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story moved you, helped you, or gave you the courage to look at your own situation differently, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it means I can continue sharing real stories like mine for people who need them most. You're stronger than you think. You're wiser than they believe. And your voice matters. Never forget that.